Hey everybody, my name is Brent Plater. I'm the Executive Director of the Wild Equity Institute. This past year, we were very fortunate to win unanimously the Reality Grantmaking panel at the Rose Foundation's Grassroots convening. And that panel is just what it sounds like. The Rose Foundation does this really fascinating project where they bring in program officers from foundations around the Bay Area to evaluate live in front of a stage, on a stage in front of a bunch of different people, different applications for grants that were submitted, and it's a learning process for everybody. And this time around, every single panelist decided that our organization and our work was the best thing they saw that year, so they gave us $1,000 right on the spot. I wanted to share that experience with you. Got a little video clip of their evaluation of our project, and so you could hear all the great things they had to say about our work and our organization. They also offered a lot of great constructive criticism about how to write grants and how to make them more persuasive that I thought everybody could enjoy and learn from. So without further ado, here it comes, and thanks everybody for supporting our work.
Again, thanks everybody for coming here. And actually, I make it a policy of never disagreeing with Carla about numbers, but I'm going to say that there were actually over 30 people that sent in reality proposals, and what happened is me and Jasmine kind of went through them and sorted out about 15, and we got about that far, and then I went off and did one of those like executive director things over there somewhere, and we gave it to Carla to figure out from there. So like actually over 30 people participated, and that's the sort of gives us this really robust pool, and that's what makes this whole reality grant making concept work. So so I want to thank everybody for that. And I got to take a second at the beginning here to thank and recognize the 6 groups that have we chose and put themselves forward as guinea pigs for this morning's exercise. And so I just want to take a second. The Capital Region Organizing Project, Stand Up, Friends of the West Shore, San Luis Obispo Coastkeeper, the Washoe Meadows Community, Wild Equity Institute, and Wolf Creek. Give everybody. They're brave people. Give them a hand. Yeah, thanks. Because we all care so much about our groups, right? And we're also proud of it. And when we write about it, we put ourselves forward, right? And so it takes a lot of courage to do that anyways, and then to do that in a way where you're deliberately sticking out into public view and into a forum that by definition is gonna sort of poke at that and offer constructive criticism. I'm telling you, it takes some courage. And so everybody here on this 6, only one group is going to get a check because that's how it's worked out, but every single one of these 6 groups is a winner, and so thank you. I also want to thank our funders on the panel, and I want to just share apologies from Pam Allen from the Goldman Fund, who was originally going to be on the panel but is sick, and so but we welcome Carla in her place. Earlier, a few minutes ago, I talked about the mistake that I think a lot of foundations make in not funding the grassroots, and I just want to be clear, I wasn't talking about the people on our panel, because they get it, their foundations get it, and in fact, they're being ambassadors in the whole funding community to explain the value of supporting the grassroots. And they're funding partners with us in helping everybody in the room, and their bios are in the packet, so I'm not going to read their bios, but just and you can, if you can make this out, but I just want to go down the line. Francesca Viator from San Francisco Foundation, there's Carla James from Rose Foundation, Christina Kenny from the Hewlett Foundation, and you met Kathy Lurza from the California Wildlands Grassroots Fund. And so I just want to ask you to give them a big welcome for spending their day with us.
I'm going to go to the Wild Equity Institute, and you'll probably know why in a second. I really liked this one. It was on the very first paragraph. I know what they wanted to do, which is prevent 5 power plants from harming health and endangered species. They had a paragraph presenting what the problem is with that. They had a paragraph presenting what the goal of the entire campaign is and how they're going to get to that goal, and they described it. They referenced to partner organizations that they work with, and they are well-known organizations, so they were definitely showing that they are in the right arena. They told me a little bit about the organization, also in the next paragraph, and then they told me about the leadership and the board, which is really important for some of these young organizations to know who is behind them, helping them out. And then they took just a little bit of real estate to tell me what their budget is. And it was clear, and it was concise, and it didn't elaborate more than it needed to, but it just gave me a picture of how much they're asking for. So this overall was, to me, in a 2-page proposal, as concise as it can be, and gave me the information that I needed to know whether it fit with something that I would like to fund or not. The one thing that I saw missing was when they described what they were asking for funding, is they had a twofold. One of them was harming community health, so they had a public safety aspect, and then they had an endangered species one. Once you drill down the proposal and they were talking about how they were going to do that, they forgot to include the community health aspect in their strategy, and they just focused on the endangered species. And I thought that that could have been, that was missing for me. But overall, I thought this was a very well done proposal.
I would echo Christina. I like the fact that Wild Equity took the tact of that this is bad for human health and it's bad for critters. It's bad for endangered species, and often you get one or the other, and I really like that it was linked. I'm just going to say, too, I had a personal connection to this because I have a friend who has, who's a young woman who has ovarian cancer, which is a disease of older women like myself. She grew up in this area, and as soon as I knew about my friend's health condition, I wondered, is this because she grew up in Pittsburgh, Antioch? So I had a real visceral reaction to this because it's about somebody I know, really, and love. So I thought it was great, and I love Wild Equity Institute. I love their work. I thought it was a good overview of a specific problem, backing out to the generals of the organization. I would have liked to have known, since they're partnering with 2 groups I know and love, Communities for a Better Environment and Center for Biological Diversity, would have liked to have known a little bit about what the partnership looks like, because those are much bigger groups. They're not, in the overall scheme of things, they also work miracles with small amounts of money, but much bigger than Wild Equity Institute. So how does that partnership break out? And maybe it's CBE who's doing more on the environmental health issues. So I would have liked to have known that. And I also felt I would have liked to have seen a slightly stronger case for why they needed the $1,000, because they said due to successful fundraising efforts, we've already exceeded our budgeted income, and they still want $1,000. Well, is this a new project on top of that, just to give a sense of what's it going to take for Wild Equity Institute to enter into this partnership and really be effective. It's going to mean a bump up, I would assume, because they already have robust programming, because we funded them. So I would have liked to have seen a better financial case.
So, Kathy, let me ask you. So, a better case. What would a better case look like? I mean, if a group has, because I realize I'm kind of lazy as a monitor. I'm not challenging you guys when you come up with something that's not working to say what should work instead.
Okay, well, I would have liked.
So what with a group?
Like I'll say, I would maybe have this budget information, which is great that they're successful fundraisers. But then I would have liked to have seen, for us to engage in this project effectively, we would need X amount of money. Our partners are doing this, and again, you could do this. You could shrink the typeface. I mean, you could find a way to do another paragraph that just puts a clearer financial and economic context. So where does because it's hard to know, how do you tackle 5 power plants, partner with these groups, et cetera, for $1,000? I mean, it's clearly only a piece of what they need, but if it's what's going to launch them, this is like our seed funding to really be able to enter this, and we have some opportunities to raise more money. I mean, I'd just like to have known what difference that $1,000 is going to make against this really ambitious project. I did like the fact, too, that they pointed out that in the South Bay, there's actually precedent for doing this differently, so that they would be able to tap into that. So it also had a solution built into it, which I thought was good.
You know, at the risk of being boring on the panel, because I know we weren't all supposed to agree and there's one point of difference, but I actually thought this was a very strong project as well, and strong proposal, and you know, the way it was outlined and the way the case was built, I thought was very effective. I liked, and I'll differ a little bit with Christina a bit. I mean, I think that it's important to acknowledge the community health angle, but one of the things that I really appreciated was the unique perspective of the power plant's impact on endangered species, the connection there, and on wildlife. Because I don't think that's talked about all that much. I think there's quite a few quite effective groups, and whether we're making progress is another question, but you know, the CBEs and the APENs and some of these bigger groups, Urban Habitat, that are really making these connections between, you know, fossil fuels and community health and community organizing and that really important body of work. But this is sort of a unique niche, and we look for those kinds of projects that are addressing sort of unaddressed issues around, you know, the impact of power plant expansion or building of power plants on the natural environment, on endangered species, on wildlife. And I think that that part could have probably been a little more honed in on, because I think that that's sort of their unique place, the Wild Equity Institute.
Can I answer to that?
Yeah.
I just want to clarify that it's not so much that I loved seeing the community health impact in this, is that if you're going to mention it up top, then you need to mention it up bottom. You can get rid of it altogether and just focus on endangered species, that's fine. But if there was a mention of it as this is part of why we're doing this, then I felt that that was missing later on.
I think that's right. I think it just got a little distracting, where it was like, what is the real core purpose? Is it really, you know, community health address and impact that you're trying to make and resolve and address, or is it really, you know, sort of this endangered species piece? I also had a question that tied in a little bit with the budget. I thought that the budget, you know, I was quite impressed. I liked to see that they've tripled their budget. I liked that it was a diversified funding. That's always something that we look for, is that they're not too heavily dependent on foundations, that they're going after, you know, the major grants, the major gifts from individuals, memberships and events. They're really, you know, it seems to be pursuing different sources of revenue. And that's something we always look for, to make sure that they're really trying to diversify their fundraising strategy. So I think that was really an important piece of it too. I would have liked to hear also just more specifically on this $1,000. I wasn't clear. It says, you know, we will challenge the approval of these power plants in court. So that made me sort of think, but it wasn't clear that maybe this is for a legal strategy. Some foundations do not like to support litigation, so that would be something that I'd want to ask about. Is that where this money would go? You know, some foundations are fine with it, but it seemed to me that that is, you know, a core part of their work, and specifically this project. So that was just something I wanted to flag as well.
And before giving this over to Carla, I want to underline that is like, because that is a real third rail issue, right? Litigation, and a lot of foundations are shy about it. Rose Foundation isn't, but you know, it's like that's where you got to know who you're talking to. You've got to know like what if you're gonna talk about the possibility of suing somebody before you put that in your proposal, or even if you're going to approach a funder, you know, for money that might include, you've got to know if that's just an anchor deal breaker for them or not. Because you can have the world's greatest proposal, fit, everything, but sue people, no. So.
And conversely, I mean, for us at California Wildlands, we do fund litigation, and that's often a plus point for us because we know that other funders won't touch that, so we will take that piece. And sometimes, you know, it's complex and we ask a lot of questions. We will do it, and so sometimes that's the thing that makes us say, okay, $5,000 toward litigation that nobody else will touch, then that's our niche. So it can work in your favor. You'd, like Tim said, though, you need to know.
This is the only proposal of the 6 that put the amount they're asking for in the first paragraph, which is, you know, this is only $1,000, you know, you could only ask for $1,000, but I can't tell you how much time I've spent looking through proposals, looking for how much money they're asking for. So it's good to put that right in that first paragraph, or alternatively in the very last paragraph of your cover letter. So that was important. It's got good subheads. It leads me through reading the proposal, the problem, the goals. All 6 of these proposals had really good subheads that really led the reader through the proposal, so that was good. I like that they told me what they're trying to do is realistic, that their goal is to have these pollution reductions that are similar to what were required in the South Bay. So it's clearly their goal is achievable. I like that they have the 2-prong approach. We like litigation, we like to fund litigation, but also to have the public process as well, so that's 2-pronged and that's good. I like that they tell me who they're partnering with. If you're working in an area and you're new to that area, I want to know that you're partnering with some of the existing environmental groups in the area. Don't leave that question in my mind. I can't tell you how many times we've been at the grassroots board meeting where somebody is saying, oh, we're doing sustainable agriculture in Oakland. Well, are you talking to the sustainable agriculture groups in Oakland? Or, how are you relating to them? How is what you're doing additive and not duplicative? And so answer that question before we have it, and this proposal did that. I liked, the bit about the history and the mission of the organization. I like that you talked about other funders that are funding you. That's important, especially for some of the larger foundations. They don't want to give groups their first grants. They want to know who else is funding you. But for the Grassroots Fund, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because part of what we feel our job is to bridge these small community groups to the larger foundations. And so if you tell me you've got a grant from Hewlett Foundation, we're probably less likely to fund you because you've made that bridge. You're sophisticated enough, your projects are developed enough that you don't need us to bridge that anymore. So you can go directly to the large foundations. But it's important to include that. I like that they told me about the organization, the number of volunteers, the number of paid staff. I also like that they have a very diverse income stream, that they're only dependent on foundations for 25% of their income. This was, I think, the only proposal that provided an organizational budget instead of a project budget, so I thought that was really useful. Although there was some things that confused me about the budget too. You have 2 staff members, but you're only paying them $40,000. And I think partly it has to do with how you're breaking out the fixed expenses versus the program.
Mm-hmm. So what would solve your confusion on the budget there?
It would be great if the program expenses were broken down, because I think that program expense amount of $24,000 is probably all staff time. And then that would solve, my confusion about how can you have 2 paid full-time staff that are in the Bay Area and you're only paying them $20,000 a year. Another question, you mentioned events, but there's no income line for special events, and so that kind of confused me. You paid $5,000 in taxes, well, you're a nonprofit, so why are you paying taxes? And this all seems really nitpicky, but when you're in a board meeting, this is the stuff that can really derail you. You do not want the board talking about why did they pay $5,000 in taxes? You don't want that question coming up. And all you have to do is footnote it. Just, give me a little footnote and tell me why you paid $5,000 in taxes.
Well, let me add one thing on the budget. To me, what resolves the confusion, when I see like a couple people, $40,000, I guess I kind of know that those aren't full-time people, right? But you can take the question out if you sort of, full-time equivalent, FTE, that's kind of the shorthand for it. So tell me what piece of a person that is, and then I know, right? And we spent a lot of time kind of talking back and forth about whether in the arguments they made the community health case. And I think that's one of the places where this proposal sort of slipped into jargon, because it talks about we're going to argue about reducing the carbon footprint and the associated acute co-pollutants. Okay, so what's that, right? If you're into this stuff, that's the volatile organic carbons, that's the toxics, that's the nasty stuff. But it's just kind of buried, right? And so it's a strength, but it's buried in the language because it sort of slips into some jargon on that. And then, the other thing, we've kind of talked about budget, and I think it's kind of interesting coincidence. I mean, you look at the budget here, and in, like a fifth of a page, they gave me the whole organization budget and kind of the big picture. And then I'm going to compare this to the last one we looked at, where there's really at least a half a page. And I mean, I got, $8.29 items and to the penny. And it's sort of the wrong, contrast the level of detail. I mean, you don't need to put the pennies in, yeah.
I forgot to mention, I think I forgot to mention it, on the history, what I really wanted to know about the history of the organization are past campaign successes, because this is a new project, and I want to know if this organization has the wherewithal to do this campaign. And I think that might be getting into that thing that everybody fell into, is that the Rose Foundation knows about my project. You have to never assume that the member has read the newsletter. Never assume that the funder remembers the last report that you wrote them, because we just read so much.
I wanted to say one other thing too on this jargon piece, and this is sort of for all proposals. I'm really like anti-jargon these days because I just feel like there's so much of it out there, and we need to really work on simplifying our language so that we can talk to each other. Especially if we're going to reach other people in other places of the country and other people who work on different issues who don't understand this kind of language. I just feel like it's critical because it's all about the fundamentals of communication. And we're a community foundation, so we, not only do we work with a body of grantees who can usually understand and speak to the jargon, but we have a huge pool of donors. And they don't like the jargon. They don't understand the jargon. And, they don't want it. They want to just hear simple ideas, how they can help, really to talk specifically about, what it is that we're really trying to address. So it's probably a whole nother panel conversation, but I just want to kind of put that out there that, if you can, when you're submitting your proposals, simple language, if there's a word that you have to look up, or that, you have to ask someone really what the definition is, leave it out, or just find a really easy way of saying it.
Sandy? An example of the jargon. Well, in this one, the example I gave was talking about nasty toxic chemicals as acute co-pollutants.
Tool.
Okay, so I'm not in charge, Carla is. How much more time do we have before we cut off?
Well, we only have an hour for lunch.
Yeah.
We got to vote.
I think it's a gone situation. I want the check up here, the big one. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go down the line, and we'll start with Kathy. I want ranked choice voting. I want 1, 2, 3.
Okay. 1 for me is Wild Equity. 2, Wild Equity. Wild Equity. Number 2 is Environment in the Public Interest, SLO Coastkeeper. Number 3, Friends of the West Shore Pipe Keepers.
For me, number 1 is Wild Equity. Number 2 is Environment in the Public Interest. My number 3, though, is Wolf Creek Community Alliance.
My number 1 is Wild Equity Institute. My number 2 is Wolf Creek Community Alliance. And my number 3 is Friends of West Shore.
Wild Equity was my number 1 also. Coastkeeper, San Luis Obispo, was number 2. Wolf Creek was number 3.
Do I get a vote? I scored it Wild Equity, Wolf Creek, Washoe Meadows. But I guess we kind of got a consensus on the first one. So let me ask you, did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? Is it lunchtime? All right. I would like to invite folks from Wild Equity Institute to come on up and get a check.
You have to be present to win, right?
Yep. So who's got good handwriting? All right, how are we going to do this? Because we got to get this photo op handing over the whole check. Everybody. This is actually probably a negotiable check, but we're going to give you a real one too. Come on, everybody. Is it too dark up here? Can we see up here? So let's have a big, it's a big thank you and a congratulations to everybody who participated, but especially to Wild Equity Institute for a heck of a proposal. Thank you.